What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my top 36 running back rankings for week 6 of the NFL season. Already posted my wide receivers. Check those out if you haven't seen them after this one. Like I said in that video, not sure if I'm going to be able to be making videos, in a few days here in Florida with the hurricane, so I wanted to get some of these larger ranking videos out earlier. So top 36 running backs. Let's just get right into it here. Starting off in tier 1, I have Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Alvin Kamara. These have been the studs to start off the season. The Ravens this week have the highest implied point total. They are 6.5-point favorites over the Commanders. With that, type of implied point number, the game script, this is definitely something that looks like one of those monster Derrick Henry games. Now, maybe the Commanders get an early lead. They go ahead. They make this competitive. Definitely possible. They're playing at a very high level. But if this is a game where the Ravens are winning by close to a touchdown, I do think this is one of those spots where Derrick Henry can just absolutely ball out and rack up a monster workload. Then for Saquon Barkley here, he is the running back 1 in points per game on the season. Coming off a bye week, I think he's in a great spot here. And then Alvin Kamara, coming off his worst fantasy game of the season, he still ended up scoring 12.6 PPR points, but definitely wasn't up to the same level that we saw earlier on. I'm not worried. The usage is solid. This is a fine matchup here against the Bucks in week 6. Now shifting into tier 2, going to start off this tier with Jordan Mason. Not coming off a great game. He's kind of in this interesting spot where the receiving usage is not really there, so his weekly floor isn't super high. You're somewhat dependent on him getting into the end zone, but I still think that's fine here on this 49ers offense. They're going to put up points. He's been effective on the ground. Still like him here as a higher end running back 1. Then I'm going to go with Jahmyr Gibbs here as my running back 5 going up against the Cowboys. I feel like the concern with Jahmyr Gibbs is just David Montgomery kind of eating into his workload. And then is he going to hit in the touchdown department? Is he going to have the same amount of opportunities as a guy like David Montgomery? He actually has the 5th most red zone touches through 4 weeks, not including the week he was on bye. And he actually has more red zone touches than David Montgomery. Now, he has 3 goal line carries to David Montgomery's 5. But that type of split is totally cool with me if I roster Jahmyr Gibbs. I think it was the week 4 Monday Night Football game. Like, he got 2 of those goal line carries. He converted. This was something that, I kind of talked about a little bit in the offseason. He wasn't getting a ton of those goal line looks, but he was effective near the goal line. Like, he is not a bad short yardage down back. So Jahmyr Gibbs hasn't necessarily even flashed that elite receiving upside this season. I like him here as a mid-tier running back 1. Then I'm going to roll with Kenneth Walker here. He is the running back 3 in points per game on the season. This 49ers defense kind of seems like a scary matchup, but they've actually been pretty middle of the pack in terms of stopping opposing fantasy running backs. What I think is interesting about Kenneth Walker's usage is he's been used fairly heavily as a pass catcher, especially over the past couple of weeks, 13 total targets in the last 2 games. It's good to know that he's fairly game script proof. If they go ahead early, they have a lead, he's going to be used heavily on the ground. But if they're trailing, it's not like this is a team that's just going to shift over to Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker's, kind of getting left out. He is going to be involved. He's going to be a pass catcher. I think that bodes very well for him moving forward. And then I have back-to-back running backs here that were drafted as the running back 2, the running back 3, and they have not panned out. It's Breece Hall going up against the Bills, and then it is Bijan Robinson going up against the Panthers. And I think there are going to be a lot of people that are seeing these rankings. They're ranked ahead of a guy like Jonathan Taylor, James Conner, Chuba Hubbard, David Montgomery, people who have been very productive to start off the season over the last few weeks. And I agree that, maybe in a normal matchup, they shouldn't be ahead of those guys and they have to prove it. But both of them have very strong matchups this week. So for Breece Hall, he's going up against the Bills. He has put up 10.5 PPR points, total points, over the last 2 weeks. That is not good enough, but the Bills have allowed the most points per game to the running back position. This is a spot where I believe in the talent of Breece Hall. It's a great matchup. If he's not getting it done in this week, there's definitely some real concern that, we have to have here. They fired Robert Saleh. I really don't think that's going to change a ton here for a guy like Breece Hall. And then the other guy here, Bijan Robinson, he's going up against the Panthers. And Bijan has definitely not panned out through 5 weeks. He is not the, high-end RB1 that you drafted him to be. The usage has been frustrating. Tyler Algier is involved. I will say, though, I still think he's clearly playable. He scored double-digit points in 5 out of 5 weeks. Like I said, that's not what you drafted him for. You didn't draft him to be a safe running back 2. You drafted him to be that stud, elite running back 1. But looking at this matchup here against the Panthers, they have allowed the second most points per game to the running back position. If there was going to be a game where Bijan, had a huge game, the Falcons are fourth in implied points, this would be the spot here in week 6. Then I have Jonathan Taylor going up against the Titans. We obviously have the, injury uncertainty here with JT. Don't know if he's going to be able to play with that ankle injury. If he plays, you're obviously playing him. If he's out, I think you fire up Trey Sermon as a solid running back too. Had nice usage, a decent game without JT in week 5. And then the final guy in this tier, James Conner, aside from like one clunker game, he's put up 14 plus PPR points in 4 out of 5 games. His usage has been very strong. Not really scared of this Green Bay Packers run defense. So I like James Conner here in my top 10. Now looking at tier 3, going to start off this tier with Chuba Hubbard. And with Andy Dalton at quarterback, Chuba Hubbard has averaged 22.5 PPR points per game. So the usage has been very strong. He's been very productive. I do think the floor is still a little bit sketchy, right? Like we saw the wide receivers obviously did not pan out in week 5. Chuba still had a solid game. Still a little bit weary of the floor, but I think at this point, he has to be locked in as a running back 1. It's not a great matchup here against the Falcons defense, but if you did, want to argue him up in tier 2, I would understand it. After Chuba, going to go with David Montgomery here. He is the running back 8 in points per game. His usage has been really strong. He's consistently getting into the end zone week after week. Not super scared of this Cowboys matchup. I like David Montgomery as an RB1. And then my RB13, it's going to be James Cook. This is just not a great matchup here against the Jets. They've allowed the 8th fewest points per game to the running back position, but Cook is the RB9 on the year. He's been productive, coming off a decent game, even though the Bills' overall offense kind of struggled against the Texans. So fringe RB1 territory, I feel like is a fair spot. Then I'm going to go with Josh Jacobs here going up against the Cardinals. He's actually coming off his best fantasy game of the season, got into the end zone for the first time, which was good to see. I think the issue here for Josh Jacobs is he just doesn't look like a super high ceiling or high floor option this year. Like the rushing volume is fine, but as we know with, some of these running backs who have super large workloads on the ground but aren't involved as pass catchers, you can have a nice game on the ground. You can go 18 carries for 90 yards, 5 yards a carry, but if you're not involved in the receiving game and you're not getting into the end zone, that's still only a 9-point game, even though it was very productive from a real life perspective. So through 5 games, he has only been targeted 11 times. That's not great. Like I said, his first touchdown, so he's not consistently getting into the end zone. It's a fine matchup here. I still think he's playable as a running back too, but probably not, living up to what you were expecting out of him when you drafted him. And then the final guy in this tier is going to be Brian Robinson Jr. going up against the Ravens. Tough matchup here. The Ravens have allowed the 5th fewest points per game to the running back position, but it does just seem like these Commanders running backs week after week, they're going to produce. They have touchdown upside. This team's putting up points. B-Rob is their goal line back. He is a little bit banged up, didn't play in the second half of the week 5 game, but I feel like that was more precautionary. They kind of had the game wrapped up. They didn't want to risk it. Obviously, we'll monitor his injury throughout the week, but right now, I still think he's playable as like a mid to high end RB2 option. Now, looking at tier 4, an interesting tier here. We have like some workhorse-ish running backs on suspect offenses, and then some committee backs on good offenses. So starting off here with DeAndre Swift going up against the Jaguars. After a miserable 3-game stretch to start off the season, he has put up 20 PPR points in back-to-back weeks. And this is a strong matchup here against the Jaguars. They have allowed the 4th most points per game to the running back position. So I feel like Swift as like a mid to high-end RB2 play is where he's going to settle in. Then I have Tony Pollard going up against the Colts. Pollard has had a 66% opportunity share to start off the year, so pretty solid considering I think most thought this would be a close split between him and Tajay Spears. He's averaging 19 opportunities per game. Obviously, the limiting factor for Pollard is just going to be the ceiling of this offense, whether it's Will Levis, Mason Rudolph. Like the quarterback play is not going to be great, so they're always going to be fairly low in terms of their implied points, but the usage is there. Pollard has looked good. He's looked fresh. Definitely looks like rejuvenated from last year, so mid-tier RB2 option. Then I just have this Bengals backfield, this committee here, with Zach Moss and Chase Brown going up against the Giants. This, at this point, has like developed into a pretty close 50-50 split. We saw 13 opportunities for Zach Moss, 15 for Chase Brown in week 5. I think at this point, a lot of people are going to be favoring Chase Brown because I think he was the only guy who got into the end zone in week 5. He had a nice game in week 4. Interestingly, Zach Moss is still kind of dominating the snaps and the routes, but obviously the opportunities have been pretty close. The reason why I have Zach Moss actually ranked ahead of Chase Brown is that he saw 5 of these 7 goal line snaps. So maybe he didn't hit in the same way Chase Brown did, but he is still in there for those goal line looks. I think if this usage continues and they're splitting the opportunities close to 50-50, but Zach Moss is, leading in the goal line opportunities, I do think he's going to come out ahead, slightly better moving forward. But who knows? I mean, this usage could flip up heading into week 6. They're very, very close. If you're playing them, I think they're solid mid-tier RB2s. Then I have J.K. Dobbins going up against the Broncos, actually back-to-back running backs in the same matchup. So Dobbins RB20, Javonte Williams RB21. For Javonte here, kind of had a rough start to the season, wasn't super productive, was in a split. But over the last couple of weeks, he's kind of bounced back here. He is 6th in targets on the season, which is pretty encouraging. And then he has 29 carries over the last 2 weeks. So solid usage as of late. Seems like this Broncos offense is starting to come around a little bit. Definitely someone who could kind of continue to improve his stock moving forward. And then shifting into tier 5, only 3 running backs here. I have Travis Etienne, Ramondre Stevenson, and Rico Dowdle. For Etienne, he definitely hasn't panned out to start off the season. He's dealing with a shoulder injury now. We actually saw Tank Bigsby outsnap him in week 5. Now, apparently that was due to the shoulder injury he was dealing with, but it's not like Bigsby came in and was underwhelming. Like, Bigsby played really well. He's actually leading all running backs in rushing yards over expected per attempt. So Tank Bigsby is playing really well. Last year, we saw strong usage from Travis Etienne, but that was with Tank Bigsby really struggling, being one of the worst running backs in the NFL. He has had a massive year 2 breakout. He has been productive. So I still think this is going to be a pretty decent split here against the Bears. Etienne has been pretty involved as a pass catcher. He's 4th in targets at the running back position. So that's, a good sign moving forward, but I definitely don't think he's a set it and forget it, high-end RB2, RB1 at this point. I think he's more of a back-end RB2 play. Then I have Ramondre, and his usage was kind of up in the air heading into this game. He had the fumbling issues, 4 fumbles in the first 4 weeks. We were getting reports that they were actually going to bench him for Antonio Gibson, and the 2 running backs were pretty close in terms of their snaps, but Ramondre just dominated the opportunities. 16 opportunities for Ramondre compared to 7 for Gibson. Both running backs were actually pretty effective, but it seemed like even though they're stand of okay, we're going to bench Ramondre, he's not going to be the guy in the first snap, because of the fumbling issues, it still didn't change them from, giving him the majority of the opportunities. So I still think he's the much better play this week. And then the final guy in this tier, Rico Dowdle, pretty tough matchup against the Lions, but it does seem like he's separated himself as the running back 1 here. 19.4 points on Sunday Night Football. Still doesn't have the receiving usage that I'd love. I know he had the receiving touchdown, but just in terms of the routes he's running, but he dominated the carries. Like I said, though, the Lions have allowed the 3rd fewest points per game to the running back position, so it's a tough spot, but it does seem like, he's trending up moving forward as the clear Cowboys running back 1. And then tier 6 here, we're going to go with Najee Harris going up against the Raiders. Now, I will say this could change based on the health of Jaylen Warren and Cordell Patterson. Not quite sure what those guys' status is going to be heading into week 6. But Najee's been underwhelming. The usage has been decent. It just seems like he has no juice, averaging 10.2 points per game. The touchdown upside has not been there. So fringe RB2 play is probably the highest I can get. Then I have this Bucks committee, Bucky Irving, RB26, Rachaad White, RB27. Seems to be pretty much 50-50. They're splitting the goal line snaps. Bucky Irving did have a bad fumble on that Thursday night game, but they went back to him later in that one, so seemed like they weren't too upset about it. I still think Bucky Irving's probably the better long-term play, but in the short term, it does seem like it's going to be a very close split. And then the last guy in this tier, Austin Eckler. Admittedly, I was pretty out on Austin Eckler heading into the season. With where he was going in drafts, I had no interest in picking him. I have him on none of my redraft rosters, but he's been the running back 27 in points per game, and that's while only scoring 1 touchdown, so it's not like he's hitting in the touchdown department. He hasn't been commanding a monster workload, which is somewhat concerning, but in this game script against the Ravens, they're 6.5-point underdogs. This could be a spot where Austin Eckler ends up racking up a bunch of receiving yardage. And then the final tier here, tier 7, going to start off with Tank Bigsby going up against the Bears. Like I said, he has been very productive. He's the running back 1 in rushing yards over expected per attempt. He led the Jaguars in snaps in week 5. So he's going to be a factor here. Still think he's the running back 2, but Maybe he continues to expand on his role and obviously is a very valuable handcuff. Then I have Jerome Ford going up against the Eagles. And once again, the Browns are getting odd with their usage. They've got Deonta Foreman taking 9 carries. Ford himself only had 9 carries, so he saw 9 of the 20 running back carries or 9 of the 19 running back carries. I think Pierre Strong got in there for 1 or 2. But the usage just hasn't been great. This is going to be assuming that Nick Chubb is still out with that knee injury. We saw him return to practice last week. Not sure if he plays this week. If he does play, I feel like I'm pretty out on both of them because I assume they ease in Nick Chubb. But then Ford, I mean, could be in like a 3-headed committee at that point. So assuming Chubb is not playing, I think he's in like this RB3 range. If Chubb is back, would really hope you have a better option out there. Then I have just these Giants running backs, Devin Singletary, Tyrone Tracy, another spot where we just don't know with injuries. So Devin Singletary misses week 5 with a groin injury. We see the Giants go out there. They pretty much roll with Eric Gray, clearly dominating the snaps on the first drive. He fumbles on the goal line on 4th down, gets returned for a touchdown. Then Tyrone Tracy steps in and just operates as the workhorse. 18 carries for 129 yards. He didn't have a single carry go for negative yardage, so he was super productive. He looked great. If Devin Singletary misses this game, I would throw Tyrone Tracy, honestly, probably into tier 4. He looked super effective. It's a decent matchup against the Bengals, who are not great against opposing running backs. So I do think he'd be in that tier 4 area if Singletary's out. Now, if Singletary's back, you're getting into like a gross split on an offense that's not top tier. So that's a little bit grosser, more of like, both RB2 plays. But I think best case scenario in terms of like upside for one of these dudes would be Singletary misses another week and Tyrone Tracy, gets his crack as the running back 1 again. After those two, going with Braylon Allen here against the Bills. In the last 4 weeks, he has averaged 10.3 opportunities per game. I talked about how the Bills are first in points per game allowed to the running back position. So this could be a spot where Braylon Allen could turn 10 opportunities into something decent for fantasy. We have another running back too who's been involved, Roschon Johnson, another guy with a great matchup here against the Jaguars. He's been mixing in on the goal line, scored a touchdown in week 4, scored 2 touchdowns in week 5. Wouldn't be the worst play if you're super desperate at running back. Then Justice Hill going up against the Commanders. I don't really think this is the game script that would favor a guy like Justice Hill, but he's had a couple of boom games in there with his receiving upside. And then the final guy here, Tyler Algier, a very good matchup against the Panthers. I'm not overly high in Algier, but clearly the Falcons want to get him involved. He could have a decent workload, especially if they get an early lead. This could be a spot where him and Bijan both kind of feast here. So that's going to wrap it up for my top 36. If you guys enjoyed the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe. Thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.